Welcome aboard Coast Guard 13.
Thank you.
Our ship still afloat in the Battle of Pearl Harbor.
Were you in the Coast Guard?
No, sir, I wasn't.
No?
Your tour is going to begin when you go aft. You're going to turn right, go through the open hatch back there, take the ladder below. When you get below, there's a blue line on the deck similar to that one.
Yes, sir.
And that blue line will guide you all the way through the ship.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Have a great afternoon. Alright guys, I am on board the USCGC, United States Coast Guard cutter Taney now, the last survivor of Pearl Harbor. She was in Vietnam as well. This is going to be a pretty interesting vessel for me to check out because I was on the Coast Guard cutter Mariposa in a former life. Sick bay. I didn't spend much time in the sick bay on board the Mariposa. But this is kind of what it looked like in our sick bay. We definitely had that same floor on the Mariposa. I think ours was a different color. Ours was like brown, I believe. But this is a really neat thing to check out. Here's the muster list. Probably the last muster list of the crew aboard. I guess these are representative of depth charges, which is kind of neat. We're just going to kind of move quickly because I'm going to try and tour 4 ships today. I'm hoping to get to this, the Lighthouse Ship, the Tursk submarine, and to a wooden ship over here as well. There's a 12-inch signal light. These were used to signal other ships. They'd use Morse code, things like SOS, ... .. These signal lights were made by GE. Pretty neat. These would open and close like this. That would allow you to send the messages. You'd have to open and close it in quick succession so that you could send Morse code messages. Lots of watertight hatches and doors on board these boats. If you've never been on board a large boat like this, they have these different hatches that are all watertight. All the doors are similarly fashioned. And that way, if you ever started taking on water, each compartment would be separate from each other, would hold in the air, and hopefully you wouldn't sink as fast. So this boat brings a lot of memories back to me of faking out lines on the deck like this and just being on board a cutter, the sights and sounds. I'm going to have to mind my time though because we have a very limited amount of time here today. These are self-guided tours. If you're ever in Baltimore, I highly recommend you come and check these out and get an appreciation for the type of life that military men and women have had to endure over the years. Let's go inside the boat here and have a look at some of the compartments inside. This is very much like the Mariposa. You would come in and go straight below decks. We landed in the mess deck typically from the front of the boat. But this is the back or the stern for all you nautical wheelers. There's the engineering officer's stateroom. You can see his bunk right here. He had a couch. A little leisure area. It's definitely a lot nicer than the area that I had to sleep in on board the Mariposa. This tells some of the boat's history. The Taney and her 6 sister ships of the Secretary class were the biggest and most capable vessels the U.S. Coast Guard ever ordered at the time. She was launched and commissioned in 1936 at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and her first duty station was Honolulu, Hawaii. While there, the Taney interdicted opium smugglers off Hawaii and helped establish the Pan American Airways seaplane bases on Enderbury and Canton Islands. Pretty neat. In 40 and 41, she underwent major overhauls, receiving more modern armament, including anti-aircraft guns and depth charges. Beginning in the summer of 1941, she and her Coast Guard crew began operating with U.S. Navy units in Hawaii, and then on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese naval air units attacked Pearl Harbor Naval Base and other military installations in Hawaii. The Taney, while tied up at Pier 6 in Honolulu, went to general quarters, and in 4 minutes all battle stations were manned and ready. And during that morning, several groups of Japanese planes were engaged by her guns. During 1942 and 1943, she patrolled for enemy submarines and escorted supply ships and carried out other combat missions off Hawaii and the South Pacific. It's pretty neat displays here. They tell the Taney's history throughout the years, where she was, what types of guns she had on board, and some of the information about the men who were on board serving at that time. This is the mess hall. Traditionally, in the mess hall, you would always take off your cover or your hat, because the mess hall was also where they would oftentimes perform surgery, emergency medical procedures, because it was one of the only clean, flat surfaces on the boat you could count on. So they'd bring people in here who were wounded, and they'd operate on them. So you always remove your cover when you're in the mess hall. It's a list of the officers and crew that served aboard the Taney during World War II. There's a lot of different men on board here during World War II. Pretty amazing. The military was a great equalizer, I think, for civil rights. It really brought men of all ethnicities and from all walks of life together, and they all had to serve together as brothers. World War II, I think, was the beginnings of that in America. It was really a great thing here in America. I love seeing all this, the sights and the sounds in this boat. It smells exactly like the Mariposa did. It just really brings back a lot of memories for me. Let's move on, shall we?
Service participation in the interdiction of enemy supply lines into the Republic of Vietnam.
So the Taney also served in Vietnam.
100 miles of coastline. This citation further noted Taney's participation in the Naval Coastal Surveillance Force that created one of the most effective coastal barriers in naval history. Large quantities of insurgent war materials were destroyed or captured, and even greater amounts were kept out of the hands of enemy combatants. In addition, this task force units completed numerous search and rescue operations and carried out medical.
This is a typical Vietnam era Coast Guard uniform, the tropical white enlisted
Here we
man.
are, early morning, March
Pretty nice.
3rd, 1970.
I like it.
Approaching the Golden Gate Bridge. What a beautiful sight. At 0900, U.S. Coast Guard cutter Taney passes under the Golden Gate Bridge and is welcomed and escorted to our home port, Coast Guard Island, Alameda, by the Coast Guard Surface and Air Unit.
Spent a lot of time doing dishes on board the Mariposa. I know that. Quick acting watertight door. These doors were designed to close, seal down. There's a heavy rubber gasket around the outside, and this would keep different compartments from flooding. Each sealed compartment was a watertight compartment, that helped keep the boat from sinking should she start to take on water. Some sort of small office. The Chief Petty Officer's mess. That's what we have here. See the Chief's symbol? The Chiefs would eat in here and grumble alone. I'm sure there was a lot of cigarette smoking and grumbling that went on in there. This is the engine room. This was a very loud place. We always had to put on double hearing protection when we would go in the engine room. We'll go in and look at what kind of engine work she had. When you would come on the boat, you would have to go through your qualifications. You'd have to learn every pipe, every wire, every diagram in the boat, and you'd have to somewhat know how the entire boat operated just to be qualified to be working on the boat. So you had to learn all these different discharges, wiring, a lot of knowledge. Engineering department. This is the watch, quarter, and station bill. This is where you would find the duties and stations of every crewman in case of an emergency condition. And you would have different jobs: general quarters, rescue and assistance, abandoned ship, NBC bill, and this allowed for a place for each person to be working during each scenario. You have different rafts listed, equipment check off, who's going to supervise the boat loading, the engineer of the watch. So you had all these different things lined out, basically a job for everyone in each different scenario that might occur. So, the decommissioning crew, these were the guys who were last guys on board. She was decommissioned December 7th, 1986, which is sort of appropriate because of this boat's association to Pearl Harbor. Pretty neat. Let's keep moving. We got a lot of ground to cover today and just a little bit of battery power on these cameras. Fife, Barney. That's our man right there. It's amazing to be on these boats. Always watch your step and your overhead when you come through. The log office and damage control central here. So they had lots of communications and ways to stay in touch with everybody on the ship in here. Move on down. More history about the boat through this passageway. Boiler room. Now here's the main mess in the front of the boat. I suppose in the stern of the boat was the officer's mess and galley. This is the general crew's mess and galley. The Mariposa was not laid out like this, but there were some similar aspects. We did kind of have this buffet style where you'd come through, and they fed us surprisingly well on board the Mariposa, and I'm sure that was the case on the Taney as well. Here we have a view of the boiler room. They made it look like a Pepsi can. This is the boiler room or fire room. It's half of the ship's main propulsion system. In this room, Navy special fuel oil was burned in 2 Babcock and Wilcox marine boilers to turn feed water into steam. The steam was superheated at 420 degrees in the boilers and sent to the turbines in the engine room at a maximum steam drum of 400 psi. Pretty neat. Oh, this was an area I was all too familiar with. BirdDogg can do some dishes. Just ask Cassie Lee. From the 1930s to the 40s, there was a mascot on board named Sugi. She was a little dog. You can see her right here. And they never sailed without her during that period of time. So, pretty neat. This is the crew berth down there. You can kind of see what life was like for me sleeping down on a Coast Guard cutter. Smaller area than what the officers would have had. This was the enlisted man's berth. We had a ladder going down like this as well. Here's another look at a crew berth. This was a lot more like what I was accustomed to on board the Mariposa, although our berths were somewhat smaller than this and more confined. I was stuck on the top bunk. I had to wedge myself between two pipes in order to be able to turn over at night, so it's not always comfortable for these guys and gals in the military. You can keep that in mind when you're nice and comfortable at home. Think about these sailors who in today's military are also living under similar circumstances. I think it's great that they have this preserved, not only for the history of the Coast Guard, but for the history of our country. These young men went to war and fought for the freedoms that we enjoy today. We all have them to thank. And many, many, many others. So this is a little different than on the Mariposa. We did buoy ops on board the Mariposa, so the front half of the boat was a little bit different than this boat. And I'm somewhat lost in this area. We certainly did not have a bathroom this luxurious on board the Mariposa. Pretty nice, swanky. Look at this. 5-inch 38 caliber upper handling room. This is where they would load projectiles into the weapon. 6 men manned the upper handling room during combat or firing exercises. The men removed projectiles and powder cartridges from the dredger hoist located behind you, which would be here. And pass them into the upper handling room through the ammunition scuttle to your right. This will be the ammunition scuttle. Look how big that cartridge is on the back of that, or the casing. Wow. So this is the ammunition hoist. This would rotate and bring rounds of ammunition up, sort of like a bowling ball lift, it looks like. At a bowling alley, you can see there's a chain drive system down here. And that would raise this up. And they would grab these projectiles and bring them over. They would place them in this box to be ready for use. And once they were ready to fire them, they would hand them to the men in here, who would then load them up and send them up to the gun. Pretty cool to see all this on board a Coast Guard cutter. I'd love to find a round like that. Wow. How cool would that be, to be out metal detecting and find one of those? That would be awesome. a little room with some more historical facts about Pearl Harbor and what happened on board the vessel. So this tells about them firing on enemy planes during the Battle of Pearl Harbor. Pretty amazing that Coast Guard cutter was there, witnessed what had happened, returned fire on these planes, and is now the only surviving ship that was there for that fateful day.
During peacetime, nobody touches live ammunition except during training exercise where we fire at sleds. But ordinarily, we fire on the platform.
All right, let's see. I think we go up the ladder now. Here we see another picture of the dog Sugi. They have a little game here on board where you can try and figure out where she is. I knew what it was before I looked. Did any of you guys? Leave it in the comments below. Let me know if you know where Sugi's at. Let's keep moving. It's the ship's armory where the gunny would hang out. Look at that. That's what you want mounted on the top of the Tundra. Do a little Mad Max relic hunting. Here again is the watch quarter and station bill for the deck department. Supply. Lets everybody know where they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to be doing. The barber shop. I just cut my own hair when I was underway. But it's nice that they had a barber shop on board the Taney. Supply department, ops, engineering, deck. Pretty cool little tour of the Taney. This was the ship's store. I utilized this a lot. You could get your cigarettes, you could get your tapes, you could get your candy bars, shaving cream, anything you kind of needed. You can see here some of the items that were available. Now let's head out here to the front deck. I guess this takes us around. You can see the lifeboat. Typically it looks like this tour would go up the ladder here to the bridge, but it appears that they do not have that portion of the tour open today. So I think this is about all we're going to get on the Taney today. Our old tour guide is looking a little rusty. But with that said, I'm going to move on over to the submarine Tersk. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of A Day in the Life. Stay tuned for the remaining warships tour here in Baltimore, and we'll see you next time.